Hey,
Hello
look, I
there,
blurred my background.
hello there, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of I Say Something, Chris Interrupts Me. That's right, you are listening to Redgate DBAle or
I thought that was just
Diwali.
every single meeting we're in together.
This is true. Every single meeting, it's like, Chris, what are your thoughts on? Well, actually, burp, burp. He's just it's shouting over me. That's how it works. But anyway, you, of course, as you know, I am Chris.
I am also Chris.
And suddenly we have a third Chris here? What is going on?
Whoa!
Yeah.
Whoa.
Three Chris's? Gosh, golly. Oh, heck. That's right. You have got a trifecta, a triple dose, a triple scoop of the beautiful, luscious ice cream that is, of course, us Chris's.
So
And
a quick meta comment, but I love it when we do this joke and it's actually a third Chris. It's not just someone.
yeah. And my name is Chris.
My-
Actually, it's Stephanie.
Yes. No, it's actually Chris.
It is. So, for those of you who don't know, we have been joined today by the wonderful, the mysterious, the enigmatic Chris Voss. Hello, Chris. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Chris, and hello, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Hey, I was really hoping you were introducing me. You never introduced me. Oh,
I do plenty around it though, Chris. But that's right. We've been joined today by the wonderful Chris Voss, and we're going to be talking about all things neurodiversity and what neurodiversity really means, in practice, in the workplace, to us as individuals, as data professionals. Now, before we get into the subject, Chris, did you want to just introduce yourself to everyone?
Certainly. So, again, my name is Chris Voss. Only to, of course, complete this whole Neapolitan arrangement of Chris's today. I am from
who's strawberry
US.
in that color scheme? Sorry.
That's
to
a good
interrupt.
question. No, that is a very, I was starting to think that myself. Wait, so who is strawberry then? Or is it a different kind of Neapolitan? But I digress. So my name is Chris Voss. I am from Raleigh, North Carolina, here in the USA, across the pond, as I believe they still say. And by day, I've been working with data for about 10 years, and particularly with the Microsoft Data Platform. I even became a friend of Redgate last year as well, which honestly is a big honor with being here. And as of last month, I became a consultant at a company called Analytics 8, where we come with many analytics solutions for various clients across the globe now. Isn't even just North America at this point. And it's been new jumping into consulting, which is an entirely new topic altogether versus being an FTE at a company. And in terms of hobbies, I'm big into things like running, collecting my share of vinyl, as I've been a big music nerd. Also, and of course, also I work with groups such as the Autism Society of North Carolina. And that is part of why I'm here today.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris. And on the vinyl note, I always remember my dad showing me the vinyl he was proudest of. He used to have one of those. It was a Parliament Funkadelic vinyl from the late 1980s, and it was a translucent yellow vinyl. It was absolutely incredible. I know the face on Chris, for podcast listeners, you can't see it, but Chris Kurzweil's face, it was an absolutely incredible vinyl to see, this just translucent yellow vinyl. But no, that's off topic. It's a pleasure to have you, Chris, and we look forward to to all of the information, the wealth of information you're going to bring us today. But of course, before we do that,
I need to know. What's your favorite vinyl in your collection? Do you have one?
Oh, yeah, the favorite one. That's still one that's hard to pick. I can't pick my favorite, though I will say the one I last played was an old used copy I have of Bob Dylan's Bring It All Back Home. I was just playing that this weekend.
Nice.
Yeah. In terms of the favorite, that one is something I'd have to think about longer, and that becomes its own podcast.
Varies by day, I'm sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, well, look, before we get into everything, let's, I wouldn't like to say we're a famous podcast or nothing. In fact, we're not. We can all admit we're not. But we are definitely known for having a good old beer, and sometimes a cider if I make a mistake, but having a beer with DBAle.
Just not known by many people, but no.
Now, Chris, Fortunately, we've lined up times for this recording so that we're recording just past midday for you. It's socially acceptable to have a beer. So what are you drinking today?
What I'm cracking open today is an area favorite straight out of Raleigh. It is the Cloud Surfer. It is an IPA from Trophy Brewing Company. They've been based in Raleigh for the last 7 years, and it is among our favorite go-tos. When it comes to IPAs, or as the tagline says, a modern IPA.
Not quite sure what defines a modern IPA from an old IPA, but still, I'm sure it tastes absolutely wonderful.
I was hoping that you would ask that, because the way they say modern, because sometimes it is something that many of us have wondered, what is a modern? Is that something different from a kind of hazy New England? And I think West Coast is modern for some reason. That becomes a whole new conversation.
I think, maybe it's more to do with sawdust content.
I was just thinking maybe
once it gets postmodern, that's when you start to worry. Postmodern IPA.
Postmodern IPA. It's actually a berry cider. It's postmodern. I was actually thinking it's just a modern IPA because it uses the metric system.
Shots fired.
No, but to be fair, I think, I don't know, a new law just passed or something in the UK that means that things can go back to being served in pounds and ounces. Or I've yet to catch up on that bit of news. But anyway,
really?
Yes, let's not go there.
Why?
Chris, what are you drinking?
I am drinking something called Hazy Pale Ale, which is the most unoriginal name I think I've ever heard.
Given you've got a filter on your video, it is looking pretty hazy to Chris and myself.
It is pretty hazy. Anyways, by the Garden Brewery, it promises to be easy drinking, juicy and tropical with notes of pineapple, which was kind of just what I was looking for. Yeah, so I'm excited. I've never had this one before, so I've got no idea what I've got myself in for.
So I tell you what,
pineapple's been popular this summer.
I think everyone's just kind of fallen in love with those kind of pina colada flavors, pineapples, coconuts, etc. I think that's good.
And I like dancing in the rain, so.
Oh, oh dear, it's going to be one of those episodes.
Oh yeah.
So I've got a bit rogue with my beer choice. I'm actually going to be drinking an alcohol-free beer. It's actually a new alcohol-free beer. It's just been re-released onto the market, and it is this. Hang on. Hang on. Here we go.
Same problem.
Remove. Oh, no. Remove the filter. Not a filter. It's a background. Hang on. Choose virtual background. None.
Oh, that's cool.
That's Drought 0.0.
I didn't know that existed.
Yeah, that is a perfectly vegan Guinness draft 0.0 alcohol-free stout. And listen,
it's got a thing inside.
It's got a little ball in the can, like regular Guinness.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So I'm very excited about trying this. Spoiler alert: I've had it before, but then it was taken off of shelves because I think of a little cross-contamination. Shall we say? I think a good American word I heard recently was snafu. I can't remember where I heard that. Snafu. So there was a little snafu, but
Fubar is the Americanism I really like in that realm of words.
Words like snafu or fiasco.
Yes, exactly. A bit of fiasco. I think another one that's used actually within the data platform community is R-bar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then again, Chris? Depends how many rows by agonizing rows of beers are gone.
Yes, indeed. Well, I'm sure over the course of the 3 or so years that Chris and I have been recording, if you were to stack end to end all of our cans and bottles, it would be a rather impressive collection. But of course, we 3 have our beers. Let's get these open.
Yes.
That made an impressive noise. Whoever that was. Oh, I've got beer all over my microphone.
Cheers.
Absolutely. Cheers.
Am I the only one rocking a glass today?
I think so.
Ooh.
Next level.
That's gone all over my
Glass.
leg
Oh,
as well.
wow. It is hard getting the angle of the pour right. As soon as okay, 45 degrees.
I don't know what's going on here.
You want some beer with your head, Chris?
Yeah, like my leg is soaking. I don't know what happened.
He's not even had anything to drink and he's already sozzled.
I
Excellent.
know. I cleaned these jeans this month as well. That's really disappointing.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Right. Okay, we've got our beers. We've got our third Chris, and I'm very happy about this fact because, Chris, it's time that we learn a little bit more about the reason why you're here to speak to us today, and that is, of course, neurodiversity and neurodiversity in the workplace, and indeed within the data community. So I think if I could just kick us off then, perhaps with a question. For anyone that doesn't know, who's maybe listening to DBAle, what do we mean by neurodiversity? Like what do we actually mean when we say we're talking about it today?
Well, so neurodiversity is meant to represent excuse me, my cat just walked across the screen. So anyway, he says hello. So neurodiversity is meant to be, it's a relatively new term. It was coined in the 1990s by sociologist Judy Singer, who was also a parent of an autistic child. And this is a way of showing, because there was a stigma when it came to autism in particular, and that's where it began, was with the autistic community, as this was a term to show and dispel any beliefs that autism is meant to be treated or cured, but a way to embrace it, that instead you're diverse, but more from a neurological perspective. Mm-hmm. It's shown that this isn't, say, a condition, or as, even though often they refer to disorder when it's, say, autism spectrum disorder, it's showing that it isn't necessarily disorder, and that this is something that leads you to it to be is considered a common disability. It's showing that indeed it is a form of diversity itself, but from a neurological perspective. Mm-hmm. That was coined in the mid-1990s. That was a chance to go ahead and embrace the neurological differences that we have, that it isn't, say, makes you lesser, it just makes you different. Mm. And neurodiversity, to expand on the definition, it's one that also encompasses mostly it's autism, and that's mostly where I can speak to, but it has lately encompassed ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, dyslexia, even Tourette's and tic disorders, and also there has been conversation of whether epilepsy, for instance, counts, as it's often now been used to refer to a range of differences that would involve learning, anything that's different neurologically. But for the most part, it is in reference to the autism spectrum, or it's autism or Asperger's. As of the latest classifications of disorders, the DSM-5, it's considered to be one big spectrum, the autism spectrum in general. So that's really what neurodiversity is for those who aren't aware, and how it is encompassing the fact that, hey, you're just different than others. That doesn't mean that you're lesser than.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting way to think about it, in that, you know, a lot of people would perceive people with perhaps physical differences who were born, they were born with, I don't know, a skin pigmentation issue. So I was born with a genetic disorder that means that parts of my skin just have rapidly different pigmentation. So parts of my body will tan, parts will stay completely white. It's all over the show. And realistically, all that is kind of a physical difference. It's how you were born. That's not actually, there's nothing actually bad about it. It's just a different way that my body works. And right. And the same is true about being neurodiverse, in that it's not actually a bad thing. It's not actually a condition. It's just, hey, your body is working in a slightly different way, but more focused around the mind specifically.
Sure.
So
That's exactly it.
What would you say then is the most important thing for people to understand about neurodiversity?
Now, that is a very good question. I would say that the most important thing for people to understand is that people won't necessarily process cues or do everything a neurotypical person would do. That's a common term to use when it comes to, say, those who aren't considered, for lack of the word, neurodiverse. Hey, somebody use neurotypical, I'll be using that word quite a bit. That they might, for instance, when it comes to autism, the by far most dominant of neurodiverse conditions, we don't process cues the same way. It's, say, when people just try and drop a hint, it isn't something we're obviously going to get. Sometimes we tend to have our own worlds that I guess differ from the worlds around us, in that sometimes there's, the most important thing to know is that not everybody's quite going to understand everything you're talking about. It's going to be something where, wait, when somebody asks, how was I supposed to know? Sometimes that might seem like a cop-out, but often those are neurodiverse who might be used to what they're thinking in their minds, or say different ways they read. For instance, again, somebody who is dyslexic will be processing letters differently. And so it's like, we are not going to see everything the way that you do. And that's one thing that's reflected. There's a book out there, which actually the author unfortunately slips my tongue at the moment, but there's a book called What Does Everybody Know That I Don't? And that is what happens frequently. It's moments where that's what leads me back to the question of, how was I supposed to know? And that not everybody's quite going to know all the social cues that are out there, or the things that are expected. When, can't they just read this? Can't people just understand that you can break from a routine? Why don't they speak so early? I know, for instance, I was somebody who didn't speak his first word until about 2.5, which was longer than many others. And one of the first signs that I had what they would call high functioning autism, which high functioning is one thing that allows, I guess, many people with autism to blend in more so. But that's also one that can be a little touchy for those of us who are, I guess, HFA or Asperger's, in that it's like people suspect you don't look it. It's like, does not quite mean there isn't a challenge, though. And going back to the original question, the most important thing is knowing that not everything is going to be processed the same. There's always going to be something different mentally, whether it's a social cue, how people might read or interpret something, those sort of elements. And I think that's what's key to understand, that they're definitely not going to have the same mental process, even as they grow, even as many of us grow older and become adults.
Yeah, people shouldn't be impressing that kind of neurotypical expectation, these kind of societal rituals onto everyone, and assuming that people will, as you say, what does everyone know that I don't know?
Exactly. It happens quite a bit.
So I guess growing up, you've kind of matured and gone through different stages of your life. So, for example, school, and then university, and now the workplace. And I guess school is going to be a very big challenge, especially, but and that's this whole can of worms in and of itself. But when it comes to the workplace, I guess the first question I had was, what would you say that the IT sphere, the IT, what's the right word for it? The IT
like ecosystem
attracts neurodiverse people more than other careers or other professions?
I would say that yes. I think it awesome. I mean, I think it definitely is something that attracts many who are neurodiverse. They have many programs for those with autism at quite a few different workplaces. Microsoft itself has a program for autistic hires, the idea with information technology is that there's a lot of logical processing involved, and that often works to a great advantage with an autistic's brain, because there's an understanding of what order things are supposed to go in, and when it comes to memory, there's that sequential memory is something that often works to our advantage. I know for me, when working with data, there are some elements of repetition when I'm, say, putting together an ETL process, or when I'm trying to go ahead and query something and finding patterns within data, and that often works as a strength. And it's one of the best things people have noted about me, because sometimes we can see things that others may not, but we're able to do things in such a logical manner that it really translates well when it comes to, say, computer programming, or any elements that also don't always require you to have to work on the social skills. That's why, that's why I say somebody who is neurodiverse, why they would thrive in, why many of us thrive in IT, but why, say, there's only a select few who could in sales, for example, because that plays more to the strengths of the person, or it isn't as much about the social aspect as, I guess, secondary. Not that it isn't essential, as I know we'll probably get into later, but that what's at the forefront is the ability to perform a task and be able to show a different way of doing it, or even being able to solve something more complex that not everybody can. It's a good area.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so in terms of this specific area, then what's your personal experience been of having a career in the wonderful world of, well, IT that we found ourselves in as a neurodiverse person?
So are you referring to, I guess, how I found my career, or what it's been, I guess, working in a world of data professionals?
I guess however you want to interpret it. I'd love to hear your own experiences as part of the answer, though.
Sure. So I'd say in terms of let's start with how I got here, and some of it and how I ended up steered towards a career in IT and then working with data in particular. It really began with the time that I had the chance to try and organize, as I was really wondering how to organize both my baseball card collection at the time, and then eventually my collection of music, particularly CDs before eventually the CDs got phased out. And I had this copy of Microsoft Excel when I was in high school, and I originally used that before I upgraded to Access, as funny as that might sound. When it came to sorting out for instance, my baseball cards, sorting, okay, this is by year, the team they played for, the player, and keeping track of those before I started to lose interest in it. And with my records, it's helped me even to this day, as I have, of course, to format the year. And it was something that I got a lot of joy in doing, just being able to re-catalog these periodically. When I moved on digital copies, making sure that I knew what I already had. And it was something I had fun doing. And of course, when I took a couple programming classes, I took a computer applications class, and then eventually even took a class in Visual Basic at the time. And I said I showed some aptitude there, and that's what led me to go for an information systems scholarship when I went to my university out in central Pennsylvania. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, just for the record. So when in college, I majored in information systems, and one of the classes that I actually wouldn't say was the class I did the absolute best in terms of grades. But at the same time, the one I had the most fun with was the class where I got to learn SQL programming and got to work with databases more. And then I did a second class that was similar when it came to information management. And those are the ones I had most fun with, and what I got to work with the most when I did my internship. So eventually this interest led to me, as they realized, like, wow, he just seems to be really processing these and obsessed, and we give him a task, he just seems to focus directly on that task, and then he's done. You just can't give him too much at one time. And that's one thing about us, that often multitasking is not where we're strongest. If we know a sequence of, okay, I'm going to do this, and then this, and then this, say 1, 2, and 3, but I need to just focus on this task for a given amount of time, then often that's a better way that I function, and that's how a lot of us who are neurodiverse function. So in terms of, that's how I eventually found myself in a career where after being an analyst, I became a data analyst and then developer, and found myself in this community today where we are now having this conversation. So in terms of being with data professionals and being in that world, sometimes I do think it does work to my advantage in regard of being rather granular when it comes to detail aspects when focused, like knowing that it isn't always about the code itself, but it can be very good in terms of, say, knowing best practices and what format to use that's best. Knowing, as instance, when, say, reading an execution plan and realizing where there's an issue with the code, being able to say, oh, it's because this is logically how it's supposed to work, and then you can tune somebody else's, and then they get the results you expect. And I will say the one thing that can be most difficult in the world of data professionals, I will say, is keeping up. As I know we've talked about as I know it's been talked about a few times, the technology keeps changing over all these years. I know how big it was when SQL Server 2012 came out, for instance, and now, of course, everybody is pushing Azure. The companies that I'm at, of course, I've been using Data Factory, Azure SQL DB, and Synapse, and just being able to keep up requires a great degree of attention. And that is sometimes an area that can be very hard to focus, but once we are focused when it comes to making sure we stay on top of our skills, then the sky's the limit, being able to actually say focus on what the skill is. And once you learn, we can go ahead and say, hey, okay, now this makes sense. And then we start asking what if in terms of how we put things together. In terms of, say, that's why I think it is different in the world of data professionals, only because in that I think what's like to be neurodiverse, I should say, is it works in my favor in that I'm able to really focus on a particular task. That I will say sometimes it can be a little harder to really grasp the social aspect and knowing how to keep focused when it comes to learning new technologies. I've had moments where I can be very start-stop, and it makes me worried sometimes in terms of, wait, am I really where I need to be in my career because I haven't really jumped on this side? Oh, I should probably learn Hadoop, but am I just doing it because I'm seeing that's what I think I'm supposed to do? Or, oh, well, maybe I don't need to be looking at this. Maybe I should just focus on, it's like, yeah, I should just keep buttressing my Python skills because I want to do more data science. Like knowing that sort of priority. Sometimes we do need that guidance, I guess. So there is some good and some bad to that degree, I think, when it comes to being in the world of data professionals, because everything is changing around us and it can be hard to keep up when we're used to routines. But at the same time, I mean, great because the logic just flows easily, and knowing something doesn't look right, it's just easy to point out how things are supposed to be in the data we see. That's why I guess we're good at cleanup and finding ways to automate it.
That's great. That makes a lot of sense. I guess apologies. I just want to ask you something that is a bit off-piste, but
That's fine.
Just on what you've just said, you know, I see like that same sentiment that there's areas of the workplace where people's skills naturally align with their own way of thinking, and you know, in that sense, it's really good to have neurodiversity in your workplace, so you have different skills and different abilities for different things. However, I've also seen, I guess, a backlash or a reaction to how society has embraced some of these things. You know, the classic example is, of course, as I'm sure you know, Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man are presenting neurodiverse people as superhuman beings or Superman, right? So just wondering, yeah, what's your opinion on how society does that, or how society kind of, I don't know, tries to turn neurodiverse people into superhumans?
I think I think it goes, and this might encompass just diversity in general. Sometimes there can be a cliche in terms of how people are represented if they're represented by somebody who's not of that same type, who can't speak to the same experiences. Now, I will say, you mentioned, of course, Dustin Hoffman's character, Raymond Babbitt in Rain Man, how he was based off a real person, Kim Peek. And I can definitely see the backlash because, again, Hoffman's character didn't represent everybody who was autistic, but there was only so much knowledge at the time when it came to autistic people in the 80s. So you'd often have the savants there are many of them who had such great memorization skills. There's a lot of details I remember about a few things, such as the logos of production companies on any television shows or movies we've seen, more than most people be concerned about, but somehow that's stuck in my brain. There's a lot of little trivia that we get stuck with, addresses that are easy to plug in because we remember phone numbers, addresses, or whatnot. And of course, we saw in Rain Man how Raymond Babbitt would do so, and since he didn't know the social cues, he'd go ahead and recite, because he realized who the person is, he'd just recite the address right there. And I think it's a touchy area. I think we've become better, and that's not to knock how people were portrayed or even the acting performances, such as, say, but even in fiction, even beyond, say, what we've seen with Raymond Babbitt, or even some modern examples in the 2000s onward, I think we've improved on realizing how people are portrayed, and that we have more first-person accounts that help to steer portrayals in fiction. That's why I guess one of my favorites when it comes to, even though he isn't directly referred to in the spectrum on the TV show Community, they have Abed Nadir, who was an obsession. He's one of the students there, was an obsession when it comes to television shows and movie making.
Show.
And Abed, I joked, is one of my spirit animals, because I sometimes have my enjoy when it comes to that level of pop culture, that he can make different references, but then there's moments where somebody's like, you think everything's like a TV show, and you literally go there, like, I can tell life from TV, Jeff. It's like, there's like, this is how it's supposed to work in those, like, but here's real life. We're stuck with, it's like, this place, and you're our hero. He kind of like rolls his eyes a bit. Just the way that they're portrayed with much more nuance, I think, as we see with characters like him, or the character on the show Alpha's Gary Bell, who's explicitly autistic, but his sense of memory is one thing that works to his advantage, but they did well to humanize him. And I mean, there's quite a few that some people wonder, are they or aren't they? The show Atypical on Netflix is directly about somebody coming from age who's in high school, as of course. And that one, they did work with other consultants who were on the spectrum to ensure that the portrayal of Sam and the portrayal of those around him was accurate. It wasn't just based off of some cliche, to, I guess, give a few examples. So I think we've come a long way. The same way when it comes to, I think, diversity in general, when it comes to diversity in general, we've come a long way in terms of knowing how people are portrayed, because we've had more firsthand accounts that can help speak to the experience. That isn't just, say, somebody who is completely incapable of doing X, but is obviously savant at Y, when most of us aren't complete savants. I mean, maybe I was in a gifted program when I was in middle and high school, but it wasn't like my IQ was stratospheric. It was just simply, and not everybody is a savant. But at the same time, everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses. I mean, I can't say I speak for every autistic person out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
You've picked up on a couple of really cool subjects there, Chris. And actually, you've named a few kind of characters who are pivotal in the kind of changing role of how people view neurodiverse people typically, and how far we've come. Obviously, there's been a big push as well of late to make sure that creators from necessary like backgrounds and just the most diverse group of individuals and groups creating content for consumption even
Right.
to the point where, like you say, there's whole, TV shows correctly being created around some of these can be quite difficult subjects for some people. Do you have any favorite creators, bloggers, speakers who are themselves neurodiverse, or anyone you would recommend to anyone listening?
I do have a few that I enjoy when I look at those who specialize, who are on the spectrum or have been on the spectrum. I'd say there's one of the first ones I'm going to go with is, and this ends up being one of the most obvious names to those who I guess know, but Dr. Temple Grandin. She, of course, came around to the autistic community. Her name became a bigger one in the late 1980s into the 90s when she published her autobiography, Thinking in Pictures. And she's somebody who has done some groundbreaking work when it comes to cattle and processing, to allow more humane process when it comes to cattle herding. And the one thing that helped in her favor was her experience as somebody with autism. And she has spoken at length in multiple books about these and also speaks at various conferences. She's somebody I've not actually had the chance to see in person yet, even pre-pandemic. But that would be one thing that I would like to do before I'm gone and before she is, as I know she is definitely older than I am. But she's somebody who still has the chance to speak with others, even virtually, about her own experiences with autism. And Thinking in Pictures is a great read that goes and talks about how she often thinks using pictures and how she can put these things together. And it's like, wow, I'm very similar in that regard. I would say in terms of more speakers and bloggers and authors, there's one I have been able to meet in person who once led an autism Asperger's syndrome project partnership, Michael John Carley. He's got a semi-regular blog, and he and I actually have been able to interact. We follow each other on Twitter for the last few years, and we've had a chance to even just directly talk about some posts that we've mentioned in our blogs in terms of personal experiences. And he's somebody, of course, himself who is now a husband and father, but he's mentioned, of course, what his experience is like being in a world where not everything was easy to understand immediately, and how maybe we can help each other. And he's good at amplifying the voices of others in terms of, say, different supports to help other people or different stories, and being able to add some perspective himself. And one other person I would definitely say who also has a good book called Look Me in the Eye, John Elder Robison. He's another one. He also does the speaking circuit as well. John Elder Robison, he is actually currently a professor of who teaches on neurodiversity over at William and Mary. And he's somebody who, his memoir, Look Me in the Eye, so about his life is he had been undiagnosed until he was past 40. But he was somebody who was an engineer. He even created the special effects guitars that the band Kiss used. And now he speaks a lot of his experience because he was somebody like many others now who were diagnosed in life. And he didn't write his book until he was 49. And now he's somebody who really speaks to that. I'd say the last couple that I would mention as of right now when it comes to those who specialize with the spectrum, there's another blogger who usually stays anonymous because we have Autistic Me. And then there's a collection of blogs with different authors called Neuroplastic. And they sometimes speak to their own personal experiences as well. I can definitely provide links to some of their blogs and just the information to get more about them as well. As there's a lot of resources on the internet in terms of say different speakers and bloggers who can speak to that. And that, of course, is just speaking of those who are known for their contributions in autism primarily.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And obviously you've mentioned a couple of things there you can provide. Obviously you've already provided so much information to us. I know Chris and I are both very grateful for that. But if somebody wanted to get more information from you, Chris, you've quite rightly said that you have a Twitter account. So this sounds like a perfect opportunity for you to plug that. So what is your Twitter handle?
My handle is CWV, CEEDUBVEE, because that represents my initials, CWV.
Haha.
So Yeah, that's my handle for most everything. And yeah, that includes my Twitter.
Fantastic. So definitely go and follow Chris on Twitter. If you have additional questions, obviously let Chris know. That would be great.
I'll open up my DMs for it as well.
Just slide into Chris's DMs. That's fantastic.
Do you mind if I take the next one, Chris?
Sure. Oh, go ahead.
So talking about educating people, and you've provided us some really interesting recommendations for books that I will have a look at, and blogs that we will link out as well. I guess for me as a manager, looking quite selfishly here, I'd probably class myself as neurotypical. About as boring as it gets. Straight white male, all the vanilla. But so I guess from you, if I could be quite selfish to ask, I myself as a manager, I'd always love to promote diversity within my team. What can I do to support neurodiverse employees?
That's a question that I have received a few times, even when I first have spoken about this topic for different groups. I'd say, and this is experience I've had with my own managers as well, to different results, to be honest, very mixed results. But I would start by saying, when it comes to managers, say if you have neurodiverse employees, one of the first things that can go a long way is ensuring that any requirements you have for them are clear and laid out, that isn't just implied. I will admit, being direct does go a long way, whether we like things we hear or we don't. There are some times that maybe we may not react nicely to it, but at the same time, it actually is, I think, for the best, at least in my opinion. When we're told, not there's need to be mean, of course, but just admitting things like, this is what I need you to do here. The ensuring that requirements are clear and being able to work with them on defining priorities for tasks, like knowing, okay, like say one thing I will do with my managers, or currently the managing consultant I work with at my company, as I've gotten started, is knowing, all right, so what I'm gathering is, here's priority 1, here's 2, and here's 3 right now. Does this sound correct to you? And they can say, well, right now, knock out this part of number 1, but number 3 is going to jump to the top of the list by midweek because this client is really asking for some help getting some pipeline set up, for instance. So it's going to be able to work with them on defining priorities and ensuring the requirements are clear. If there is an office environment, maybe, for a lot of us are working remotely now, some of us permanently, and reducing overstimulation, though, always helps, which that one is more of a company thing, I believe. But if the managers have the chance to also help them out with overstimulation and helping them, I guess mentoring is the last thing I would say, is if there's a chance to pair them. Some companies have used a program with office mentors, and that helps because maybe the person who's on the spectrum, it's possible that they'll be able to mentor somebody else when it comes to the technology. For instance, I've found myself in more senior roles lately, so I have a chance to help somebody with the technology on, say, if they're entry level starting out. But on the other hand, office politics are still hard to navigate. So one thing as a manager is making sure that if there's a chance to go ahead and mentor them on, particularly if they're starting out in the workforce, helping them with navigating the office and the culture and what others who won't know about say their case on the spectrum, whether it is a person with autism or an autistic person, which person versus identity is another topic when it comes to the spectrum. But working with them to make sure that they are equipped with the tools to succeed if they have to deal with managers from other teams, or making sure they're good with their colleagues. And just, again, going back to the beginning, just ensuring that whatever's required of them is definitely clear and what they should look out for in order to do good on the job. Like the things they should look out for need to show their own initiative. And that really helps a lot of us to be in a place to succeed. And that's some of the best managers I've had. That's what they've done for me. And it's been great.
That's
Amazing.
a great answer and great help. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's also helped me out in moments where I've become a lead on a project too, where I'm able to go ahead and help others, because now I'm in the reverse position myself, even though I'm not a manager, where there's moments where people take more direction from me. So it's like, oh, I'm going to try and reply this in reverse now.
Absolutely.
So I guess the natural question then from others, so that's my own selfish kind of take on it, but you've spoken about how what managers can do and what companies wider can do. What could just individuals in your team or just typical people do, neurotypical people do to make their workspaces or events more friendly to neurodiverse people?
Well, I think one thing that can help is don't force the situation when it comes to social events, especially as we're now at a time where for a lot of us, social events are going to be rarer. I mean, for some, we're making our way back into the office, depending on, say, vaccination status or if people feel comfortable. But now I would say definitely don't force the social situations. If people need to space themselves out for a bit, if they say, hey, I just need to step away, if it gets really loud, just being able to honor that wish. They can't always be there plugged in all the time as much as somebody who's naturally extroverted may be. And that doesn't mean there aren't autistic extroverts. They definitely exist. I have moments where I can be a people person for a while and then I want to retreat into my hole, depending on if somebody brings it out of me. I'd say that's something that people can do, is to make sure that when it comes to these social events or social situations, never to force it on them. Allow them the chance to go off on their own for a bit and don't feel the need to pressure them. They might actually be very content. And if somebody, for instance, needs to put their headphones on because noise may be too much, most employers that I've known don't have a problem with somebody needing to put their headphones on to focus on their work. And if somebody does have a problem with that for some reason, then it really shouldn't be an issue, I would say. Like, say, different employees that when you are, say, in an office environment, knowing, okay, they're going to be focused right now. Here come my headphones. I'm blocking out all the possible sensory overload at the moment, whether it's, say, a whirring fan, depending on where I'm sitting in the office, or because this person behind me is on a call all the time. Just being able to honor the wishes that they might need a nice environment to work. I'll admit it's one of the nice things when I'm working from home, such as right now, that I have an office where I can decide on the lighting that I'd like to have. Like, say, there might be a situation, this can apply to neurotypicals, where they might not want overhead lighting, but it's something that often those who are neurodiverse, they're going to be more sensitive to it. And I think a lot of it is, again, not forcing them to be social when they don't really need to be. And I think that's something that can help when it comes to a workspace, or say there are events that bring groups together. Knowing that it's like maybe they're not going to be fully engaged 100% of the time, but that's okay. That they actually need longer to recharge, the same way, say, an athlete needs time to recharge after some major training. I sometimes need longer than most to recharge after a social event. I get peopled out easily. I'll admit sometimes I build up my energy, say when I'm at a conference, say when Summit was in person. I could definitely do the evenings, but then there's sometimes it would take me a little bit in the morning, or I'd go to a session, but I really wasn't ready to converse yet. And some of us need that, or there might be, okay, the last night, I'm just going to take that night to myself now that events are done. And then and then maybe I'm only going to speak to my wife when I'm back home, and that's about it. For like the first 2 days. I think it's, providing that space, I guess, is one thing that I think can really, that's the major thing that I think could go towards making things more neurodiverse, more friendly for the neurodivergent.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, I completely understand and agree with all of those points. I think it's really, really important. But the the interesting part was when Summit was in person. You mentioned Summit being in person,
right?
Way back in 2019, when because I was in Seattle as well. And
Yep.
I ended up actually speaking to someone who was neurodiverse at Summit, who ended up telling me that and something that might also contribute to this point was they were saying how they appreciated the fact that Summit were taking the opportunity to film things properly, because where it did become overstimulating and you just couldn't be around all those people anymore, or you really wanted to go and see a talk, but like you say, you were just burnt out, just had no energy for it, didn't want to interact, needed that time. The fact that it was recorded meant that you were able to still get that content. So something that can be done is providing the necessary infrastructure so that you still get the information you need whilst, you want to be there in person, or you want to join the virtual event, but you don't necessarily know how you're going to feel, how it's going to be.
Right. I think it's exactly, and I think you hit on a good point. When I was in Seattle for it in 19 as well, yeah, that recording helped. And I will say, having the wide auditoriums for speaking definitely helped. There was a moment I think I just need to sit by myself for a little bit. I mean, I know there's a stigma of looking like the loner, but I think I just need a second before rather than talk to somebody that I've talked to before that I know in my community. So I'll just need a bit. Oh, hey, how's it going? All right, now let's talk. Okay, yeah, we can do lunch. I'm glad to hear that. I'm definitely glad to hear that, because that's some of the best conferences have worked that way back when. And you're right, in person and virtually alike. And one of the great thing about virtual is, again, you can choose to step away when you need to. Sometimes it's the Irish exit.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, and more to your point about overstimulation as well, I would be a fool if I didn't plug my favorite neurodiverse creator as well. Other Chris as well. I don't know if you've got one to contribute here as well, but I am shamelessly a big TikTok fan. I love TikTok. I spend far too much time on TikTok, watching TikToks over and over and over again. Honestly, it drives people around me absolutely up the wall. But there's one TikToker, she's called Sound of the Forest. And
I've heard the name.
So she is phenomenal. She's so interesting and funny and honest, and she talks a lot about what it's like to be neurodiverse. She talks a lot about overstimulation and about the methods that she uses to cope with that, like the headphones, like a sensory swing, these sorts of things. And she's obsessed with like moths and insects as well. And honestly, it's just the perfect wholesome content that you want to watch. And I think she's doing a wonderful job kind of introducing these, in basically using her platform to spread awareness and to just be open, be honest, and giving everyone that information means that they come with their best foot forward. Whether you're neurodiverse or neurotypical, if you have all the information and you tackle a situation that you're in with kindness, with consideration, and with respect, you end up in a situation where everyone's happy and everyone's treated the way they need to be. But speaking of platforms on which we're able to share fantastic information, Chris, you're going to be speaking at Past Summit, literally Past Data Community Summit this November, aren't you?
Yes, I am. The Neapolitan Chris arrangement. We don't know which Chris is speaking to who.
Well, we could all be presenting. Sadly, that's not the case, but two of us are.
It's just point at who you're referring to. So if I'm talking to Chris, I do this. If I'm talking to Chris, I do this.
And to be fair, though, our screens could be different. So it's like, wait, but which way are they pointing?
Just point to the camera. Then you've got
this means curse while this means unwin.
Exactly. This means unwin. It's all about throwing a gang sign.
There you go.
Unwin.
Oh. Word.
Oh dear. But Chris, what are you speaking about at Past Data Community Summit?
So exactly the topic that I would say almost exactly the topic that we're talking about today.
Amazing.
So I've given a talk about neurodiversity in the data platform before, which actually the first virtual one was where was my first ever Summit speaking experience. And now I was It was interesting. Kathy Kellenberger reached out directly to me to ask about a variant of doing this again is it was popular over the last year, and also when I had spoken about it for a couple other virtual groups in the course of 2020 and 21. So Kathy had reached out to me about presenting either a similar session or even doing the same session again. This way people have the chance to do Q&A in person about it. So I'm basically expanding on my previous session. As one thing that I've thought about is also, even though I've focused mostly on autism, but thinking about other aspects of neurodiversity as well when it comes to, say, ADHD, the entirety of the spectrum, and other conditions, as I've been trying to get some more ideas. And what I'll be speaking out is about those experiences of those of us who are neurodiverse and how and where this applies when it comes to, say, mental health and IT. And I won't directly talk about mental health. Tracy Boggiano does that and does great at it.
Oh, I love Tracy's sessions. Absolutely.
Shout out to the Triangle Zone. Anyway. So, but at the same time, how it helps us mentally as well. And yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and speak more about, it isn't even just a primer, but I'm starting more of a greater discussion this time, as I actually title it a greater discussion, where I'm going to try and dive just a bit further in. I mean, still basically a lot of the high level that we're talking about. What is neurodiversity, a history of it, and knowing how others can work together, but also even getting some more experience about those who are neurodiverse employees and how we can do our part as well. Most of us who are involved are, I guess, higher functioning. That can be, when I say higher functioning, it's a word that not everybody is comfortable using. Some are more comfortable using it than others. But at the same time, for those of us who are, most of us are higher functioning, there's things that we can do as well, in addition to what others can, what those who are neurotypical can do for us. And I'll be speaking on the similar links about neurodiversity and the data platform, but delving in just a little bit further in terms of the things that we do in terms of some more real life experiences, and hoping to gather some more of that from the community as well, based on some of the conversations that we've been having over the last year and how we've all helped each other, and I guess how we helped each other out through this very weird time.
Yeah. Absolutely. Brilliant. So in that case, then, unfortunately, we have hit our time. I'm going to have to play time cop. We don't have time for any news, which is absolutely fine, because honestly, the news is supposed to be informative and helpful. And if there's one thing that listening to you speak today, Chris, has been, it's been both informative and helpful. So, you know,
not to mention long-winded at times.
Oh, not at all. All
worry.
perfect. Absolutely.
One thing
perfect.
about us, many of us do not always know how to cut details out.
That's absolutely fine. It's all good detail. Everything's important.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
why I have to rehearse all my talks like 3 times through.
Right. Well, look, you've done like fantastic for us here. So I wouldn't say you weren't a podcast aficionado, professional, whatever you would prefer. But it's been great having you.
Podcast pros now?
No, not at all.
But yeah,
Chris, you host one. This is my first time actually being on one that didn't include a shout out. This is my first time where I can say, hey, I'm actually on it.
Exactly.
Nice.
So do be sure, if you are listening, please go and register for the Past Data Community Summit. Guess what? It's free. And guess what? You can check out Chris's session. And, you know, if you've got some time, you could listen to my session as well. It's all about, you know, free pipelines and, you know, using Flyway Community with Azure SQL Database and Azure DevOps. It's going to be a hoot. It's going to be a blast. But
also, I will quickly say we've got a webinar coming up October 28th that I think we should all check out. So for more information on that, please go to redgate.com/events. where we have that and many others.
And what's the webinar, Chris?
It is a webinar hosted by Troy Hunt, someone who
name.
we have mentioned several times on this podcast before. So they'll be talking about security and compliance and estate monitoring. And that'll be Steve Jones and Troy Hunt together.
Wow.
But as I said,
two behemoths of
right?
the industry. Gosh.
Yeah. Serious titans right there.
Go to redgate.com/events for more information on that and many others.
Absolutely. So you've not got long now until Summit. We look forward to seeing you there. Go and watch Chris's session. Please come and watch my session. And again,
Celebrate the fact that I'm not hosting a session.
Celebrate the fact that Chris Kurzweil is not hosting a session. But for now, it's a massive thank you from me, and a massive thank you to Chris Voss as well for joining us. We really appreciate you being here. It's a huge honor for us.
Hey, thank you, Kurzweil and Kurzweil and Unwin. Thank you both for having me today. It's been an honor and a privilege.
Anytime. I've got 2 glasses. I'll do a cheers. happy conflict resolution day. We forgot about that one.
Oh, well, we've resolved. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.